The Babadook is an Australian horror film focused on the relationship of a widowed mother and her son. Released in 2014, The Babadook set an example of psychological horror focused on monsters. The Babadook as a monster is a type of boogeyman, reliving aspects of childhood monstrosity that come to life through paranoia. The Babadook is a really interesting monstrous figure, one that explores aspects of culture and self in the quiet and subtle ways that it comes to life in the film. The way the Babadook manifests plays with the expectations of fiction and reality and comes to possess or alter our main character, Amelia, is an example of how monsters can be a powerful force in horror and fiction. So, today, let's explore the monstrous figure of the Babadook. Perhaps the best place to start is our two main characters who dominate the entire narrative. Despite there being scenes with other figures, such as their neighbor and their family, the movie is almost exclusively our two primary characters, Amelia and her son, Samuel. Amelia's husband died in a car crash while driving her to the hospital when she was in labor. The incredibly traumatic experience is obviously still haunting Amelia when the movie starts. It opens with a dreamlike sequence of the moment of death, where Amelia is reliving the moment in her nightmares. It's Sam that wakes her from this dream, concerned about his own nightmares that he's reliving. This then takes us on a sequence of the typical parental ritual of checking for monsters. Though there is a different experience of this in the movie's render. Amelia looks exhausted from the movements. She's tired and only going through the performance of the act because it's what's expected rather than because she wants to. This sequence is the heart of the whole movie and the birth of the Babadook. Amelia embodies a type of motherhood that is seldom demonstrated in popular culture. Amelia has dispassionate reactions to her son throughout the movie, especially in the beginning segments that we see her acting through duty rather than love. She's mechanical, going through the motions of helping her child with nightmares without the tenderness behind it. She flinches when Sam tries to touch her. She responds to actions with distaste and shifts between feeling protective and dismissive. Adrienne Rich wrote of maternal ambivalence, saying, quote, "My children cause me the most exquisite suffering of which I have any experience. It is the suffering of ambivalence, the murderous alternation between bitter resentment and raw-edged nerves, and blissful gratification and tenderness. Sometimes I seem to myself, in my feelings towards these tiny, guiltless beings, a monster of selfishness and intolerance." As a monster, this is where the Babadook stands, at the borders of becoming, the possibility that society's stressors and emphasis on the innate joy of motherhood is sometimes not present. In fact, this expectation of care and nurturing is put on Amelia in all aspects of her life. For money, she works in a care home, has to take on the role of head of household and domestic work. She has responsibilities as a mother. She cares for their elderly neighbor through acts of labor. Her entire life is built around the idea of caring for others. She has both the internalized pressures of her expectations, but also the external pressures and expectations from those around her, including family and institutions. The Babadook is a representation of this other form of motherhood, the ambivalent motherhood, which hides within it social judgment and the toll motherhood can take on an individual. Writer and director Jennifer Kent talks about the assumptions of motherhood in saying, quote, "It's the great unspoken thing. We're all, as women, educated and conditioned to think that motherhood is an easy thing that just happens. But it's not always the case. I wanted to show a real woman who was drowning in that environment." Her continued actions of ambivalent motherhood continue to other her, both in the eyes of wider society and in her own judgment of herself. Her family begins to reject her abilities as mother through the not normal actions of her son Samuel, and I should stress not normal in quotes here. When she turns to a GP for sedatives to help her and her son sleep, he tells her it's a choice, quote, most mothers, end quote, would not choose. Again, emphasizing that she is not like the understanding typically presented to mothers. The Babadook begins to take over Amelia as she continues to give in to the harder parts of motherhood. The Babadook, therefore, is a doppelganger of sorts, an alternate version of Amelia which has become possessed by her feelings of distaste for her son. As she continues to give in to the feelings of rage that are so often denied to her, she becomes more and more drawn to the monster. The Babadook is therefore both a source of horror and of emotional release. Although as a monster he stalks Amelia, possesses her, changes her, she also relaxes in the ability to voice the emotions that have been building inside of her, but that she has been refused to let go of because of the social expectations on her as mother. The scene where Samuel comes to her expressing how hungry he is, her release of anger is both troublesome on how it would affect her child, but also a very clear release of the stress that has been building up inside of her. In fact, one of the scenes that demonstrates her stress and anxiety is when she has a day off from her job as a care worker because she is supposed to be going home to care for Samuel. Instead, she has a day to herself, doing very simple actions like eating ice cream and walking around a mall. These small acts of self-attention are a demonstration of what she feels she has been missing within both her grief and her motherhood. But we also see the social pressures put on her from the way others look at her as she goes about this day. Her obvious guilt when caught out is not only in being caught in her lie, but in her dismissal, even temporarily, of her social responsibilities. This doppelganger monster is one that is constantly present. As the pseudo-children's book tells us at the beginning of the film, the more you deny, the stronger I get. As the movie progresses, Amelia is not just denying the existence of the Babadook, but through him, her own grief and ambivalent motherhood. As she continues to deny this, the animosity she feels towards her son grows. In the scene where she shouts at Samuel as he says he's hungry, her phrasing comes to take on the rhythm of the Babadook's call.
Why do you have to keep talking? Don't you ever stop?
The doppelganger possession of the Babadook is an exploration of her own emotional connections, or more importantly, her disconnections. You can't get rid of the Babadook. This is something the book tells us at the very beginning of the film and is repeated by Samuel at the moment that they first think they have completed the exorcism of the Babadook from Amelia. The ending of the movie demonstrates how this works in reality, when the monster is not made manifest in a coat and hat, but is within ourselves. We cannot rid ourselves of the monster in the way that we cannot rid ourselves of the ambivalent part of motherhood. We must harbor it and bear it, but manage it under proper circumstances and in a way that does not damage those around us, like our children. Jeffrey Cohen sketched out his 7 theses of monsters and monster studies, or 7 ways that monsters represent our cultural and social fears. 2 of them can be used to look at the Babadook. Monsters border the possible. In some aspects, we see this in old maps, where unknown seas were marked with "Here be dragons." But the monster can also monitor the borders of the social and cultural possibilities. It shows us what we should or shouldn't be doing. The Babadook borders what is socially expected and possible of mothers. Likewise, the Babadook stands at the threshold of becoming, another one of the monster theses. Here, the Babadook marks the possibilities of monstrous becoming for motherhood. It demonstrates to us that motherhood is not the flowers and pleasantries that society likes to paint it as. It's hard work, it's pain and suffering, but also moments of joy. But we are expected to hide these other, less joyful bits away and pretend that everything is fine. The Babadook demonstrates the place where these monsters consume the mother and mark her as a social monster. These feelings we have are always wanting to be let in, rapping at our door to the rhythm of Babadook, Dook, Dook. But they can be exercised. They cannot be completely let go. We should not deny it, but we also should not allow it to consume us. They must be managed, cared for, and held within the special places of our homes.